we're going to begin in the Premier League, and we're going to focus on a side who did escape relegation. And in the end, they escaped it with a little bit of room to spare. They played some lovely football along the way. We are, of course, talking about Brighton and Graham Potter, who continually gets linked with jobs higher up the Premier League. We'll talk more about that later on. But let's, first of all, Mike, dig down into this fascinating character, because he is a very different breed to the majority of the managers that we have in the Premier League, certainly the majority of the English managers that we have in the Premier League. And this is a man who is not afraid to take risks, not afraid to take chances. And I guess you could say, calculated gambles, perhaps, because he arrived in the middle of Sweden. I think at the time he had an 11-month-old. He had a wife who was very unhappy about the prospect of living in the middle of nowhere in Sweden. He'd left a cushy job in Leeds to go and take this opportunity, and he didn't know where it would lead him. In the end, huge success. His decision was rewarded handsomely, but he's a man who, for most of us, we wouldn't fancy that, and we'd be a bit wary. But Graham Potter seemed to take this very much in his stride.
Yeah, he's I wouldn't say necessarily comfortable with risk, but he's very comfortable with the abstract and the unknown, and a real sort of bigger picture thinker. So he kind of came into the whole management game, basically, understanding that based on the career he had and where he started, leaving his career early in order to go into, doing a degree in social sciences, he knew his chances were going to be limited and he'd have to make a real splash somewhere. And, and that it was just, this opportunity came along in Sweden and he saw the potential of it. He saw the potential of really making an impact with everything he'd learned down the years. So, he was kind of so many steps ahead in his own progress, in his own journey of what it could become, and kind of knew what the alternative was as somebody who, was struggling even in the context of non-league football to get jobs. It's really competitive when you're just a known quantity of so many different ex-professionals just trying to make the way in the game. He kind of sensed that he would have to do something different, and the opportunity that came along at Östersund basically allowed him to apply all of the skills that he'd learned in university regarding communication and things like that, and people skills.
And it must have that unwavering belief in yourself as well, because if you don't believe that you can turn things around, they've just been relegated. He talks about how he felt the town was completely disenfranchised from the club, and that some fans even wanted their club to lose to prove a point against the hierarchy. But he came in, he turned things around. We'll talk about some of the methods he used shortly, but that is not someone who ever really doubts themselves, is it?
No, he seems to be very confident in what he's doing. And he has a plan, he's, like you say, he's a forward thinker. And he went into that job knowing, first and foremost, he understood that he had to change attitudes. And it wasn't just attitudes at the club of the players, but also attitudes around the club. And that was going to be done by connecting with people. And, he's not necessarily, there's an awareness around this being an important aspect, but that's not necessarily a skill for him, a natural skill. Again, we could go back to Nigel Adkins a little bit here in the sense that, these are learned behaviours. He's gone away and applied himself in certain fields to understand things that he wants to know. He goes back himself to his own playing career and kind of was able to distinguish. I remember what a positive dressing room felt like, and I knew what a bad dressing room felt like. When you know the difference between the two, my first thing that I was thinking is one of the most important things I would have to do as coaching is learn how do you create one and not end up with the other. So, he went and studied social sciences and just kind of applied himself into education, but was doing extracurricular activities around university and coaching in that sense, and was just kind of trial and error, just trying to get through as much as he possibly could to understand these things and what would be applied. So Östersund was kind of a low pressure environment in the sense that there was no outside focus on the club. He could just really focus on those relationships and the schemes that they were coming up with in order to create these dynamics and give him an understanding of what can make footballers tick, not just in the sense of how you coach them on the training pitch and their understanding of football, but how ways and means in which you can get them to grow as individuals. Because I think he understands that if you can tap into the individual and get them inspired, then that inspiration carries out onto the pitch as well.
Yeah, I've written down the words Nigel Adkins because Lifelong learner, I guess, is a phrase that you used actually last week. And that seems to be what Graham Potter is. He speaks about one of the reasons why he did his course in social sciences was because he was reading an article and he was only skim reading it. And he claimed that his brain had got lazy, and that was a very worrying time for him. So he said, if I have to engage it, I have to do something different. Social sciences, and then of course has learned plenty on how to engage football, as you say. And he talks about his time on that course, Mike, and he says that he was the only one from a sporting background on it. There was ex-military, there were medical people with medical backgrounds on it as well, doctors, nurses, other people who had worked in, I guess, high pressure situations. And he talks about how he learned on that course, particularly lots of things, but I think the thing he took most away from that is how to deal with failure.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's interesting that, some of the occupations that you mentioned there, surgeons and military and stuff, these aren't necessarily people orientated, they're not in the emotional realm of connecting with people as comes naturally. They've gone to learn these skills. And I think that speaks I think Potter was possibly similar to them. He might have come from a completely different background in sport, but I imagine he was quite similar in wanting to develop these skills. But you say about him, one day it just dawned on him that he was skim reading. This is a flow state for him to go deep. He has to go deep, he's not honouring himself. He's not, he's letting himself down. And I think that was the realisation. Possibly didn't, it's not something he's conscious of every day. What's the quality of the information I'm learning and stuff like that. But you give him real quality information, he'll dive deep on it and really, take on board concepts that might be really difficult for a lot of other people to grasp because it's not in the concrete world that you can see and hit, feel and touch and stuff like that. Is, relies on experience. He's a visionary that can see things in the future by just understanding a few different concepts from different worlds. So I think this was a big part of him going back into university in his 30s and kind of wanting to rediscover himself because he was tapping back into that flow state because potentially hadn't been using it enough as a footballer. So he's taken his football experience, but then kind of gone to reconnect with who he really is when he's gone into academia and started learning about all these new things.
Yeah, he's big on personal development and he wants his players to I guess, follow a similar path, maybe not to quite the same extreme, but certainly to develop as humans as well as players. And now I'm pretty sure he doesn't have time to do this sort of thing at Brighton, nor at Swansea previously, but at Östersund, he put on amateur productions of Swan Lake. They were putting on various plays as well. The players were singing. He speaks about how even the players who were shy and very reluctant at the start eventually saw all their friends and all their colleagues getting involved and thought, I have to give that a go, and ended up belting one out at the end of the night. He talks about how he got his wife to become a Pilates coach whilst at the club. He got like a mindfulness coach as well in. These are all aspects that deviate from the path slightly, don't they? They're a bit off the beaten track, but they clearly worked at Östersund. I don't think he does all this at the Amex, but clearly he'll be taking little bits from there, little bits from here, won't he, and implementing them into the daily and weekly routine of the players.
Yeah, and all of this is basically about how the mind works. We talk about this flow state and how he likes to go deep on things. This is about, I refer to it again, it's the same flow state that I use in terms of being fascinated with how, personalities and stuff like that. And it kind of develops in the sense of you always kind of think to yourself, why do I think in that way in this situation, in this scenario? And then it kind of develops to the stage of, well, why does that person think that way? And why does this person think this way? It gets ever more nuanced as you get older to understand these things. And this is Graham Potter. He wants to understand what makes people tick. By taking people out of the comfort zones in that job at Östersund, he learned a hell of a lot that he doesn't necessarily have to produce Swan Lake and all of these kinds of, theatre productions now with his Swansea and Brighton players to understand what might bring them out of their comfort zones and make them grow. He can kind of take the experiences of what happened at Östersund and kind of apply a scaled down version of something that, just might be something in the day-to-day environment and the way he sets things up, the order in which he does training sessions. It could be anything really, but he's now pattern recognized the behaviors that followed certain emotions and certain places that you took people to and how they grew off the back of it and actually became better footballers. And so now this is all, he can apply this now in a Premier League context. It's no problem for him to think, well, this works in the Swedish leagues, the lower Swedish leagues, but I can't do that with Premier League footballers. He can understand the lives of a Premier League footballer, the distractions they've got, the money that they've got, and everything, and what is necessary or not necessary to get them to a certain place mentally and in a certain mental space. But ultimately, performances are the ownership of the players. He's not a manager in the sense that he tries to control everything, the whole step by step from minute 1 to minute 90. He's trying to create people that can go out there and think for themselves and solve their own problems on a football pitch. That's why the really important thing for Potter is to get their minds right and get them in a place where they're thinking clearly on the pitch.
Yeah, like you say, you could, I guess, put on all those productions with the spotlight glare definitely not on him at Östersunds. Pretty sure that if, Lewis Dunk and Neil Mopai were taking part in the Nutcracker, that would probably have made the papers, I would imagine. But so similar approaches, but as you say, scaled down. He is big, though, on, like you said, the personal development side. The 5 words he uses to refer to his management approach: self-awareness, empathy, responsibility, motivation, and relationship building. He also says as well that you, as a manager, you do need to know about football and tactics. I mean, I think that's a given, but he goes on to add that you also need to know a lot about people and what makes them tick. I guess that is, would you say, Mike, one of the key traits of a modern day manager? We see this more and more. We talked about it only a few weeks ago, really, with Dean Smith as well. That culture, that getting players, to just be in that environment, be comfortable, be developing and learning every single day. And if you've got a leader like Potter, or indeed like Dean Smith, then that must make it significantly easier.
Yeah, and it's interesting. These last few episodes that we've done, I found have been interesting for me because it's kind of making me think about environment and culture and the whole infrastructure that's put in place to try to get footballers to thrive, and how these are different personality types and people coming at it from different ways, all trying to achieve the same goals. Where Potter's concerned, it is he's not obsessed with an end goal. It's about the day-to-day. It's about creating a learning environment, and that, it is, again, I'll go back to it. It's about people developing themselves and being able to think for themselves. It's not him imposing a system on them. Now, he does to some degree with the style of play, but when it comes to the day-to-day environment, it's about footballers thinking for themselves and developing that personal growth side of themselves. And basically him just be, empathy is the big one. Of the words that you mentioned, empathy for him is the flow state. The others were kind of ones that he's worked on, that I think he's gone away and tried to study because he understands, his personality is to want to get these things right. The relationship building, that doesn't necessarily come natural. That's the realm of emotion and how people connect with each other. But the empathy, trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try to understand how their mind works, that's Potter through and through as a flow state.
And also, talking of the football side of things, he's very wedded to the style that he wants to play. He's committed to playing short passes, attractive, easy on the eye football. Okay, this season it's resulted in several missed chances and lots of in-depth discussion about Brighton's XG numbers not marrying up with their final league position. But it's, a joy to watch. They play some really good stuff, and he isn't going to change his principles now, is he?
No, he's the ultimate process man. And I mean, I guess this is where the comparisons with Pep Guardiola come in, because I think Pep Guardiola's got a lot of respect for Graham Potter. And I've noticed in the build-up to previous City-Brighton matches, it's kind of like Pep Guardiola normally has nice things to say about opposition managers, as opposition managers have nice things to say, but you sense there's an underlying deeper level of respect there, that he's gone away and studied the way that Brighton play from game to game. And he's thinking, and he probably doesn't realise that Potter sees the game kind of in exactly the same way that he does, but he's seeing things, nuances in the tactics of how Brighton set up from one game to the next, of like, that are surprising him, that are making him have to think, they're challenging him. And I think, this is, once the process is in place, there's a lot of nuance to it. And even though Brighton haven't been hitting their XG numbers, other process managers will recognise what Brighton have done and the way that they're going, and we'll see clear progress, even though that progress isn't always evident in the league table from one season to the next.
And they did have a coming together, of course, on the sidelines at the end of last season, but it was probably much of nothing. Pep obviously has this respect for Potter. Lots of other managers will too. And you imagine lots of chairmen will as well, because, Mike, this is a man who every time there's a vacancy higher up the Premier League, we see his name in the betting. Now, he's not necessarily one of the shortest prices. He's not at that stage yet. Probably needs a few more seasons, I would imagine, at the Amex to establish himself. And maybe a top half finish with Brighton would just be the catalyst to move him forward. But do you see him fitting in at a top six club? Would he have to pick very carefully, do you think?
I think he's top six standard and can, beat Tom's, but it needs someone to take a leap of faith. Graham Potter, the chairman, would have no qualms about employing Graham Potter, the manager, but chairmen have got, they tend not to be as visionary sometimes, but also that, football's big business, and you take someone like Everton, for example, and their place is where it is in the Premier League. If they suddenly catapult, or if they suddenly slide down the league by appointing this visionary manager who doesn't get it right straight away, it can cost them a lot of money. It might, it might be better for the long term and excite the fans more, but ultimately, it's a gamble. And this is the thing is, I don't see an awful lot of difference, for example, between Brendan Rodgers and Graham Potter. And you look at what Brendan Rodgers has done with Leicester, different personality types, but in terms of being able to create an imagined future and be able to think outside the box or just do things a little bit differently, I see them as very similar. But Brendan Rodgers is only where he is because he got the track record first, and that, he kind of had certain achievements at certain stages that got Liverpool and their new owners when they first came in to take a leap of faith. And now he's built a whole career on the back of that. Potter just would possibly need either to break through the ceilings of expectations with Brighton before a top six club would take that chance, or, if a club did take that chance, that's the concern for Brighton, is that we're seeing all this progress in their XG and all this promise, but then Potter gets plucked away before they actually get to see the results of that. So I guess that's the concern for them. And, it's shaping up so far. He's been linked with Everton, he's been linked with Tottenham, and it's not really come to anything. I think it's a bit too much of a gamble for owners and executives at that level to want to stake their own reputation on backing him. But I do think he's of that calibre for sure.
Is there a bit of fan pressure as well? Could that be a problem for Potter? Because, there is a bit of an obsession when managers come in. And again, we're only taking social media side of things. So this is not a true reflection of all fan bases. So if you are a fan of any of these clubs, please don't assume that I am talking about you. But you see on social media all the time, when these unknown managers come in, or a side takes a rare leap of faith, as you say, well, what has he won? What has he done? Has he competed in the Champions League? Has he done, obviously he's done the Europa, but, has he won any trophies? Has he got anything in his cabinet? And there's that immediate, expectation on the manager. Potter feels like the sort of man who needs to bubble under the surface, who needs to build up quietly and then take fans by surprise and go, oh, hang on, man, this guy is good. If he's parachuted into, your Spurs or an Everton, and there's this immediate need for results, as you say, there will be, I knew we shouldn't have appointed this guy. He was only at Brighton before and at Swansea. What has he ever done? There's just seems to be that attitude, doesn't there, towards managers like Potter, because he hasn't won a big European trophy. But you've got to start somewhere. And, at some point, these clubs have got to break out of the mold of appointing the same sort of 15, 20 managers.
Yeah, I think we're in the realm of percentages now as well, because this is personality types. Most people do think that way. Track record is a priority for a lot of people, and this is what makes Potter different. And, as a visionary and stuff, he's a rare personality type. He sees things differently. He's very abstract in the way he tries to understand things. And it's, you say about managers like that having to start somewhere. It's also interesting in the sense that Potter did all his studying first. I think what people possibly don't realise is how much work has probably gone into getting him to this stage. I think he's prepared to take a risk, like the fact that, or he's prepared to go outside of the normal journey in terms of going to Ostersund, but I don't think he's the sort of manager that's willing to take on too much too soon. So I think if he's willing to take on a top 6 job, then that suggests to me that he's ready, because I don't think he's the type of personality that would throw himself in at the deep end if he didn't think he was ready. If he didn't think he'd done the forward thinking enough and kind of tried to put himself in all these different positions that he's never been before, and then kind of simulate out how that would look and how his methods would change in that circumstance, and how players at that level might think differently to the players he's got now. I think once he's simulated all of this in his mind and planned it all through, then he'll take the job. I don't think you could just drop him in there, parachute him in, and he'd have to learn on the go. I think he'd want to understand it somewhat in advance. So just by the very nature of him taking the job, would say to me that I think he's ready, because I don't think he'd take it otherwise if he didn't think he was himself.
Mentioned Brendan Rodgers before. I guess if he's ever plucked away from Leicester, maybe Potter could be the successor there, perhaps. Just one last thought then. Next season, creeping up on us, Mike, the fixtures are out for the Premier League already at the time of recording, and Graham Potter will be hoping to have Brighton just that little higher up the table this season. He'll also be hoping to avoid any such scares about relegation. Now, I don't ever feel like Graham Potter thought his side would get relegated, or probably even looked at the league table much, but the fans were getting nervous at one point, and they'll be hoping for a much more comfortable ride this time around. Can Potter achieve that?
Yes. It's going to be about either A, the development of the players, or B, the recruitment. And it's about converting that XG and that dominance of games into actual goals on the pitch. And, does Mopé, for example, develop, does all the compound effects of all the personality development type stuff that goes on behind the scenes at Brighton, it probably goes a lot unseen. Does that just burst into life? Do you begin to see the compound effects next season, and then suddenly you've got this 25 goal a season striker that's just kind of burst onto the scene from nowhere, it seems, after missing bundles of chances the year before? Or, relative, you can talk about many players in the Brighton team. It's not, not just one individual. I don't think they have to do an awful lot different. They just the conversion has to be better, and it's just about that cutting edge and being more clinical. And I think this does possibly come down to personality development. And I think, we're kind of at a point now with Brighton where they, you kind of still see them as newly promoted, even though they've been 3 years, because they've never quite cut loose or had a season. Even Sheffield United had that one season, and you kind of looked at them differently last season, and then it all kind of fell apart at the seams, and they ended up bottom of the table. Whereas with Brighton, you've never, ever looked at them as anything other than just that team trying to acclimatise at the level. But I do think they are ready to take the step up. It's just about taking the chances, as you say. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Potter's process. And I think it speaks volumes for Potter and his strength of mind that despite everything, he stuck to the process. He's never compromised at any stage. He's never... he's never taken a short-term fix to solve a problem. He's always been, and if anything, I think he's been of the mind that, well, if we get relegated, we get relegated. The process is still good. It's a process that can still get us back up. And I think he's so wedded to that process. That's one thing, having the strength of mind. And I think this kind of goes back to Pep Guardiola. I think this is where a lot of the admiration comes from, is the fact that life can be so difficult where Brighton are in the table and the type of resources they've got relative to other teams. To stick to your principles in that scenario, shows real courage. And courage is a word, interestingly enough, it's probably the word used most by Guardiola and used most by Potter as well, when it talks about players as on the football pitch. Both of them always talking about having the courage to play.